Welcome back to the page, Harry Potter fans. We've got a new chapter for Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always by Dead Woodpecker. And here we are at Chapter 27, Potter's Army.
Chapter 27, Potter's Army. Chapter text. "It's my fault," Neville whispered. He had not spoken a word for nearly an hour. The headmaster's office had been silent since Harry had explained falteringly, and with tears streaming down his face, what had happened. Harry, who had been thinking precisely the same thing except in terms of himself and not Neville, jerked his head around. How did Neville work that one out? "It isn't your fault." "It is," Neville insisted. His face was twisted in a grimace of pain. He was shaking and looked as ill as Harry felt. Luna had not stopped wailing. It was a low, keening sound full of pain that tore Harry's insides. ITT told her that she should say something. She was owing Mr. Lovegood too. I don't think he would have said anything about it if it weren't for her. "If it weren't for me." "You got all wrong," Harry wanted to say. But he knew the signs of self-blame. Merlin knew that he had been there often enough. And it would take Neville a long time before he would be able to place the blame entirely where it belonged, on Voldemort. Nothing Harry could say would change this, so he did the only thing he could. He grabbed Neville's shoulders and hugged him. "It isn't your fault," Harry said. "It's Voldemort's fault." Hermione and Ginny wept with Luna and stroked her long, dirty blonde hair. Ron had one hand on Hermione's shoulder and the other on Ginny's. His blue eyes were wet. So were Harry's. In fact, Harry felt as though he were spinning out of control. This wasn't supposed to happen. Why did this happen? How could I let this happen? He should have known. He should have made sure that they were protected. He knew how dangerous it was to befriend Harry Potter. It was never more evident than at this moment. Harry's voice broke. "I should have made sure they were protected. Neville, Luna, if we'd had any idea." Neville tried to pull himself together. It took visible effort. "It isn't your fault either," Neville said hoarsely. Each word appeared to be torn out of him. "If I can't blame myself, you can't." Harry grimaced. He knew that he had not used his wand and murdered the only family his two friends had left. No, he told himself firmly. Not the only family. We're their family. All right, all right. Neville looked as haggard and weary as a man 100 years older than Dumbledore. He blindly reached for a chair, sat down, and put his head in his hands. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Harry gripped Neville's shoulder and felt his own lips tremble. The lamps in the room shone oddly through his tears. I just can't believe she's gone," Neville said. "Just like that." Luna spoke up then. Harry had not noticed that she had stopped wailing. They aren't really gone, Neville." She was gasping a little, as though every word caused her mortal pain. "They aren't. They're watching us. They still love us. Goodbye is never really forever." "I agree," Hermione said, heartfelt. "As do I," Dumbledore said firmly. Neville and Luna seemed to need silence. The hours passed. Dumbledore, Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, and Sirius, Moody had gone to destroy the letter Voldemort had left. All stood a sort of vigil over their grief. There were murmurs. Harry even murmured some, but he did not know exactly what he said. Words came to him as though from a deep well inside his mind, one that he did not have ready access to. The rune that meant pain swam in front of his vision. Harry saw it in line of Neville's clenched jaw and the curve of Luna's back. There was one last hug, and Neville and Luna left. "Professor Dumbledore," Hermione said softly. What about my parents? I did not believe they were harmed this night." Harry would have. "No," she interrupted. "They need to be safe. They told me what I did, a memory charm. I want that to happen again. They wouldn't understand if we told them. So, can one of you—" "I'll do it," Sirius said gently. "Just tell me where they live." She did so, and he left immediately. Harry did not fully like the idea of toying with Mr. and Mrs. Granger's memories. But Hermione knew them a lot better than Harry did, and it wasn't as if they were stealing memories. Sirius would only give them different ones. And as soon as this was over, Mr. and Mrs. Granger would be restored. As soon as the fire in the hearth flared green, she sank into a chair and let out a low moan, as if what she had done had caused her physical pain. Ron knelt beside her and wrapped his arms around her. "What about?" Ginny said. Her lips were white. What about our parents? What if they? Harry did not think it was likely. Voldemort had not thought of the Weasleys at all. Though Harry had avoided any mention of them, he had not buried his head in the sand completely. He'd caught glimpses of headlines after Ron and Ginny had left the burrow. He knew that it was no great secret how Molly and Arthur felt about him. But he could not bear to tell Ginny this. It was a pain, perhaps just as strong as Hermione's, though in a different way, in Harry's heart that the Weasleys needed no protection from Voldemort. Harry knew that Dumbledore was thinking along these same lines. Harry guessed that even Ron and Ginny were thinking this. Hermione certainly was. But it would not be mentioned because that would be admitting to something no one wanted to say out loud. There are wards that we can put up, Dumbledore said in a subdued voice. We can put them up around the burrow. If you will allow me to think on it for a day, I will decide which ones will be most suited for our purposes. Subtle ones, Ron said. We don't want them figuring it out. They'd go to the effing Prophet, and then Voldemort would figure out that we want to protect them. It'd be open season. Blood wards. Dumbledore murmured to himself. But which? He dug through an old trunk full of books. Let's go back home, Ron said. Hermione, you look like you're about to fall over. Let's get you to bed. I don't care how sad I am, Hermione whispered. I'm still not sleeping in your room. Not yet, Ron said with a hint of a smile. Harry, Ginny whispered. I want to make sure that they're okay. I'm going to go to the burrow. I know you probably don't want to go. Try and stop me, Harry said, though she was right. He absolutely did not want to go to the peaceful burrow. He felt like seeing it might feel quite like a knife to the gut. But Ginny would not be able to rest easily unless she did this. And Harry would not let her stand watch over her parents' house alone. They used the Floo to go back to Sirius' home in Godric's Hollow, and from there they operated to the small lane. Harry disillusioned himself and Ginny, wishing, with a pang, that he still had his invisibility cloak, and they crept up to the slanted building. Hominum Revelio, Ginny whispered. There are 3 people in there, she told Harry. I'm assuming it's Mum, Dad, and Percy. Harry nodded. They found a comfortable patch of grass beneath a tree that afforded them a good view of the burrow. Harry rested his back against the tree, and Ginny sat between his legs and leaned up against his chest. They both had their wands out and ready, but neither truly thought there would be an attack. The sun rose and painted the burrow in golden, early morning light. Shadows moved across the windows. The inhabitants were stirring, preparing for the day, unaware of being watched. For the first time in a long time, Harry felt himself remembering the Weasleys the way they had been. The burrow had been a refuge for Harry, much more so than even Hogwarts. Mrs. Weasley, mothering and loving. Mr. Weasley, who always made time for his children, and Harry. The Weasley brothers who treated Harry like he was one of theirs, they had all played such a huge part in making Harry who he was. Harry laughed, and Ginny turned her head to the sound. What is it? I'm just remembering your mom, Harry said. Remember when the twins used Polyjuice Potion to fool her? And she thought they were 2 random muggle boys from the village who came looking for a glass of water. Ginny snorted. Mum was so confused, she had no idea why the muggle repelling charm had failed. And Fred and George kept asking questions. What was that brown thing that just ran by? It looked like a little person. Or how did that clock know that your son was coming home from work? The look on her face when they started turning back into themselves. Harry chortled. What about the time when Dad first saw Ron and Hermione snogging? Ginny said, the poor man, he was so confused. I think he was the only Weasley surprised by Ron falling in love with Hermione. Though maybe he was more surprised by Hermione falling in love with Ron. Come to think of it. Did you know that he gave Ron the sex talk right after that? Did we ever tell you? Harry asked. I was up in Ron's room, and your dad came in and immediately started talking. I couldn't even escape. I don't think he noticed me, though, which was good because I think it was only 3 days after you and I slept together. Poor Harry, Ginny said, though it explains how you suddenly learned the contraception charm. Remember when you and your entire family thought that when Charlie talked about Norberta, he was talking about a girl and not a dragon? Harry grinned. For over a year, Ginny snickered. Mum lamented over the fact that she wouldn't be able to come for Christmas because of the war for weeks and weeks. Harry had no idea how much time passed while they reminisced about the family. The sun climbed higher and higher into the sky, reached its zenith, and started working its way down again. The backs of Harry's eyes felt scratchy from lack of sleep, but he did not feel tired. They kept their unseen vigil. Gradually, their voices tapered off. Harry could think of any number of stories, both silly and sweet, of the Weasley family, but now he preferred to sit in silence. Arthur, Molly, and Percy were still in the house. It was Saturday, and no one had to work. He wondered what they were saying, what they were talking about. He suspected that a widely discussed topic was the absence of their youngest son and daughter and what Harry might be doing to them. Remember how he never even considered that things might be different? Harry said in a low voice. I remember that conversation with Dumbledore's portrait. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was your parents' affection. He was so adamant that we weren't to tell Mum and Dad and the others until Voldemort returned, Ginny said in a low voice. Ron and I, while we were at the Burrow earlier in the summer, before the huge argument, we started wondering if maybe he knew. Harry smiled. It was so easy to think of Dumbledore as having powers beyond any other wizard. But Dumbledore was, after all, just a man. I don't think, and we don't either, Ginny said. Not really. He couldn't possibly have known. But I just can't help thinking, I know it's awful, but if my parents had been supportive of you, they could very well have been killed by Voldemort last night. Harry had already thought of this. A small voice in the back of his head had repeated the refrain. Thank Merlin, it wasn't the Weasleys. Thank Merlin, it wasn't the Weasleys. He felt horrible for even thinking it. It was awful that Augusta Longbottom and Zeno Lovegood had been murdered. But he had to admit to himself that he might well have given everything up had the Weasleys been lost last night. Irrational anger directed toward the Weasleys surged up inside him. He hated it that he felt at all relieved about the situation. He hated it that his heart seemed to be torn to shreds because of them. Ginny seemed to sense his tension. Remember how we came back in time to save them? Always and always, Harry. That was the promise. No matter what. She was right. But Harry knew that something had broken inside him. The chain that had bound him to the Weasleys had broken. He loved them, yes, but he loved the memories of them, not who they actually were. And he loved them because Ginny still loved them, despite the fact that Molly and Arthur must have said some terrible things. But the Molly and Arthur of this time and this place, Harry thought he might loathe them. It was unfair to them. But the rational, reasonable part of him was growing fainter and fainter. Harry eventually dozed in the late afternoon sun. He slid into sleep and into a nightmare. He was in the Forbidden Forest, and people were calling out his name. He hurried toward their voices, but it was difficult to manage because the trees were upside down. He ran and ran until he came to a sharp cliff. He looked across and saw all the Weasleys wearing golden crowns standing on the other side. He looked down and saw that the cliff had no bottom, but something bright and shining was coming up to him. A giant copy of the Pain Rune approached, providing a bridge to the other side. But no, he did not want to step on it. He was afraid of the pain it would cause, and he could hear Voldemort's high, cold laugh. Harry, Ginny shook him awake. We fell asleep. Sorry, Harry groaned. Are they okay? I'm sure they are, Ginny said softly. It was early evening, and the first stars were beginning to come out. Ginny performed the spell that would reveal human presences again. 3 people still, Ginny said. She yawned. Merlin, I'm exhausted. That nap was not nearly long enough. Not for me, either, Harry said. Still, they both remained vigilant until it was full night. Several pops disturbed the silence of the orchard in which Harry and Ginny sat. They rose to their feet with one fluid motion and pointed their wands in the direction of whoever had just apparat. Where do you think they are? Hermione hissed. Right here, Harry said. He lowered his wand. You could have warned us you were coming here, Ron said grumpily. We had no idea where you'd run off to until Dumbledore came to tell us he'd found the wards. Hush, Ron. We were almost certain they were here, Hermione said. Which wards did you choose? Ginny asked, interested. 7, Dumbledore said. They're subtle, as Ron said they should be, but I think they will be even more powerful because of it. Any outright. Blatant wards of protection would tell Voldemort what we do not wish him to know, should he chance by the Burrow, or any of the Death Eaters. He's come up with a brilliant plan, Hermione said, and awe colored her voice. The wards will be laid out every few feet. Whoever is trying to enter the Burrow will have to make it through all of them, and each ward will communicate with one another. It's all very complex. It sounded complex, and Harry was not quite sure if he truly understood what either Hermione or Dumbledore were saying. Wards communicating with each other? And what did it matter if they weren't all in the same location? Dumbledore seemed to read Harry's mind. Complex wards, the kind we will be constructing tonight, are almost sentient, like wands. Once someone has passed through the first, certain information will be given to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and the seventh wards. Same with all the rest. The first, second, third, and fourth are wards of intent. If anyone has ill will toward any of the Weasleys, the first will pick up on it. Then, the second will judge if the ill will is directed toward Ron and Ginny, or if it is directed to the other Weasleys, or both. I believe that this will be the one to determine whether or not the person is a Death Eater. The third will then judge the strength of the ill will. For instance, if a ministry worker who does not particularly care for Arthur approaches, he will not be in immediate danger. But will that stop Death Eaters? Harry asked. Death Eaters will be pretty hacked off at us too. Which is why I am here, Snape said smoothly. Harry started. He'd had no idea that Snape was with them. What you may not know is that the protean charm that is burned on our skin has created a bond, very similar to the blood bond, between all of the Death Eaters. Dumbledore will be able to create a ward that will stop all those who wear the Dark Mark. But if you can do that, why are you bothering with the other wards? Harry asked. Not all of the Dark Lord's followers have the mark, Snape said. Fenrir Greyback, for one. I assume you do not wish him to be allowed access to your family home. Definitely not, Ginny said. That will be the fourth ward, Dumbledore said, and the only one that you will not assist me with in the creation. The fifth ward will both compel the Death Eater or other follower of Voldemort to turn back, and it will alert Ron and Ginny to the fact that Voldemort had reason to send someone to seek out your parents and brothers. Not even Lord Voldemort will be able to push through this ward. What about the sixth and the seventh, though? Harry asked. He felt slightly confused. It seemed as though they wouldn't need the last two, if what Dumbledore had said was true. The sixth, which will actually be physically located after the first ward, will know if the Death Eater has come calling again, Dumbledore said. And the seventh will kill. Harry found himself in complete and total agreement with Hermione. Dumbledore's plan was so brilliant and so cunning that Harry was awed by it. He could tell that Ginny was as well. Even though Harry had strong doubts that any Death Eater would call on the Weasleys, Voldemort may well decide to kill them for the sole purpose of revenge on Ron and Ginny. Harry did not think this would happen anytime soon, if at all, but it did not hurt to be cautious. And Dumbledore's plan was a masterpiece. Later, Harry would realize that the hours they spent creating the wards or watching Dumbledore do it, with brief assistance from Snape, Ron, and Ginny, felt like a ceremony. No one laughed, no one joked. Ron managed to stop the funny, but inappropriate comments from coming out of his mouth, and no one said any more than they had to. Harry stood beside Hermione and watched the runes go up, flaring and sparkling like the moon and stars, before they faded. He could not help but notice that he felt as though he was not only protecting the Weasleys, but he was also saying goodbye to his last shred of hope that they would join him. HP. Longbottom, Lovegood found dead. By Aggie Lafferty. Late last night, the Ministry received an anonymous tip that 2 bodies had been found at the Lovegood residence. The Aurors immediately went to investigate, and found that this was the truth. The Ministry refuses to comment further, though Bertha Jorkins, new member of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, confirmed last night that the murders had been perpetrated with the killing curse. The Aurors refuse to mention Harry Potter as yet, though the Daily Prophet would like to mention that we believe that this, too, is the work of Potter. It may even be that he killed them himself, instead of having followers do it, for the article concerning the trial of David Yaxley, and Amicus and Electo Caro, and the murder of Mr. Ollivander. Wandmaker, see page 4. It is no coincidence that the two killed had, in the past, supported Harry Potter. Lucius Malfoy graciously offered another interview, and has this to say: "It is no secret that Potter expects loyalty from his friends. I would not be surprised if Mrs. Longbottom and Mr. Lovegood had refused to continue in their support. My son Draco claims that Potter's little school friends were extremely terrified of him." Lucius Malfoy offers words of wisdom, as always. As we have previously stated, see other issues for articles regarding Ronald and Ginevra Weasley. It may be that they have been coerced into joining Potter against their free will. Their parents have testified to that end. The Daily Prophet would like to add this warning to all witches and wizards: do not attempt to reason with Potter. If you see him, alert the Ministry at once. He has already proven himself skilled with the Imperius Curse. Do not give him time to enchant or bewitch. Harry was idly wondering if they ought to retaliate against Voldemort by killing all of his Death Eaters, or if they ought to humiliate them in some way. Their plan with the Carrows and Yaxley had worked rather splendidly. They were now in Azkaban. Even though Harry knew they would be liberated when the other Death Eaters were, it still felt rather nice to have them out of the way. For now, the thing holding him back from killing, however, was the truth that Voldemort would attempt to counter his move. But what would he do? Harry, Ginny, Ron, and Hermione had spent endless hours of discussion on just this topic. It was now the middle of October. Mr. Lovegood and Mrs. Longbottom had been murdered in the beginning of September, and they still had not done anything to retaliate. Pettigrew could die, Harry thought. Voldemort would not even be surprised. But fear for the lives of those he loved stayed his hand. He desperately wanted revenge, but he also wanted to protect. Just the night before, after a long day of tutoring Hermione, although mostly she tutored them, Harry had thrown his hands up in despair and told Ron that if he could come up with a plan to take out Death Eaters without murdering them, and making them heroes in the eyes of the Ministry, then Ron should let Harry know, and they would do it. "Harry!" Neville's voice came from a mirror that sat on the table. "Harry, are you there?" Harry leapt up from the couch so fast that he nearly fell over. Neville had only contacted him 4 times in the last month and a half. "Neville, what is it? Is it that stupid bitch again? Do you need more essence of Murtlap?" Neville had contacted him about Umbridge each time, with increasingly nasty news. Umbridge had suspended him and Luna from all Hogsmeade visits. She had forced them into detention and attempted to force them into telling her where Harry was. Each bit of news had been said in a flat, dead sort of voice that made Harry want to strangle Voldemort and Umbridge with his bare hands. "No," Neville said. He sounded different, almost excited, and yet afraid of Harry's reaction. "It isn't about Umbridge. I sort of made a mistake." "Well, tell me what it is, and I can fix it." Harry immediately promised. He did not want Neville to think that Harry would be angry at him for anything, barring joining Lord Voldemort. "No," Neville said. Harry peered at him closely. The mirror showed him a grief-stricken young man, but he saw a spark of hope in Neville's eyes that pleased Harry very much. He did not believe that Neville could fully recover from the death of his grandmother, but he was healing. "No, I made a mistake, but, Harry, you won't believe what happened." Then Neville told him what had been happening at Hogwarts in the last few weeks. Neville had been right. He'd had to repeat himself several times before Harry actually believed it. Harry rocked back on his heels, holding the mirror very close to his face. He stared at Neville without really seeing him, an internal war taking place in his head. It'll just put them in danger. They already are in danger, but not like this. We saw what he did to Neville's gran and Luna's dad. Are we back to the cycle of self-blame and pushing people away? Aren't we too old for that now? Yes, no. I don't know. Just shut up. We already know we have to do this. We should be happy about this. All right, Harry blew out a breath. We'll come tonight. We'll be there. Neville smiled, the first real smile since his grandmother had been murdered. Harry stared at him intently, noticing, as he did so, that Neville actually reminded him a lot of himself after Cedric had died the first time. Harry knew that Neville was angry and resentful toward pretty much everyone. Luna had mentioned this to Ginny several times. But Neville had also been trying to rise above that, obviously. Harry felt absurdly proud of him. "I'm about to tell the others," Harry said. "Be there at 7:30, Neville told him. I'll need some time to explain a few things. Ginny, Ron, and Hermione had none of the misgivings that Harry had. All three were doing a victory dance before the words had fully left his mouth. After a few moments, Sirius had abandoned all dignity and joined in, laughing. Harry just stood there, watching them, until Ginny dragged him out and spun him around the floor. It was like having a breath of fresh air after spending what felt like months in a cave. Despite his worries, Harry's stomach quivered with excitement and gratitude. He had more friends at Hogwarts than he actually thought. 15 minutes before they were told to arrive, Harry and everyone who lived at either Grimmauld Place or the house in Godric's Hollow, except Ollivander, operated into the private room in the Hog's Head Inn. Hermione was busily checking over her notes. Ron was bouncing from foot to foot. Ginny was beaming. Moody was still invisible, and Sirius' eyes glinted. He's always been up for getting students to break the rules, Harry thought ruefully. There were quick, sharp footsteps on the stairs, and Albus and Aberforth Dumbledore both appeared. I have finished explaining to him the reasons why we need to use this room in the pub far more often, Dumbledore said. I've agreed, Aberforth said gruffly. We'll have to put a privacy charm, a strong one, on the door. It isn't that unusual for a few of my patrons to want a quiet place to talk. That's over now, though. Thank you, Mr. Dumbledore, Harry said politely. And, Professor, I didn't expect to see you here. No, Dumbledore said, surprised. I thought you might wish to have an extra symbol of authority. And I will also be able to ensure that they will not tell this secret. If Umbridge were to hear, it would have ghastly consequences. I know, Harry said. Thank you. Let us not keep them waiting. Dumbledore gestured to Ariana's portrait. It would be extremely impolite to be late. One by one, they clambered through the portrait hole and followed the twisting corridor up to Hogwarts and to the Room of Requirement, where Neville had gathered, against all odds, students who had seen what adult wizards had not. Flaws in the story presented by the Ministry. Harry's first impression of the Room of Requirement was that of a wax museum filled with his stunned, frozen classmates. Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Lavender Brown, Parvati and Padma Patil, Hannah Abbott, Colin and Dennis Creevy, Justin Finch-Fletchley, Ernie Macmillan, and to Harry's great surprise, Daphne Greengrass stood gaping at him. Neville and Luna stood in front of them, looking rather smug. Blimey, Dean Thomas said as Ron and Ginny followed Harry. Hermione, Lavender said, we thought your parents had kept you home this year? That's what? I'm so confused. Comfortable chairs began appearing as Sirius and Dumbledore, and the invisible Moody climbed in as well. Daphne squeaked and clapped her hand over her mouth. Harry eyed her, wondering how Neville had thought of approaching a Slytherin. Not that it was a bad thing, but Neville, as a rule, was quite afraid of the snake's set. So, Harry said, thanks for thinking that I'm not some mad dark wizard. We're not sure about that, Parvati Patil said, her arms crossed. Neville and Luna's story sounds completely ridiculous. And yet you're here, Parvati, Hermione said calmly. And so are the rest of you. They all exchanged uncertain glances. Things just don't make sense, Dean said. All these articles, most of them don't sound like you. I can see you using the Imperius. Which I did, Harry said solidly. Several of them shrank back. Hannah and Ernie looked fearfully at his wand, as though he were about to start Imperiusing all of them. But we didn't think ye'd use the Cruciatus, Seamus said. Remember when ye pulled Draco Malfoy out of the way of that hippogriff? And ye got yourself hurt, and ye hate Malfoy. And when we heard that Neville's grandmother and Luna's dad were killed, Padma Patil said, we knew that you'd never do it. We asked Neville about it. Dean indicated himself and Seamus. Whether or not he really thought you'd done it, and he sort of screamed at us that it wasn't you. It was you-know-who. We thought he was completely mad, Seamus said. But we thought about it. I knew you weren't evil, Harry. Colin Creevy said excitedly. I knew it. The conversation disintegrated after that. Everyone was trying to speak over each other, and Harry could hardly hear what anyone was saying. He caught snatches of it. Apparently Hannah Abbott still did not quite believe that Voldemort had actually returned. Neither did Justin Finch-Fletchley. The only thing that they could all agree upon was that something weird was going on involving Harry and his friends, and they did not believe everything that was printed in the Daily Prophet. Only Daphne Greengrass remained silent and watchful. She stood a bit apart from the rest, as if she was not sure that she was supposed to be here. Harry took a deep breath, preparing to shout at everyone to just shut up, and he'd give them an explanation when Daphne stopped him. "You know who is back," she said. "I thought you said none of the Slytherins were talking about it," Hannah said rather nastily. Daphne raised her brow. "They aren't, but several of them are strutting even more than usual. You know, Draco and his two loser friends, Crabbe and Goyle. Not Flint. They're all acting like they've got a great big secret. And it could just be that their Happy Potter's been smeared Slytherin. It doesn't have to be because you know who is back," Hannah persisted. "You're forgetting, you Hufflepuff moron, that Professor Dumbledore is here," Daphne said coldly. "Which means that he probably believes that you know who is back, and that Harvey here is telling the truth. I'm sorry if that pretty much convinces me." "Thank you, Miss Greengrass," Dumbledore murmured. His eyes were twinkling. "I do indeed believe that Harry is telling the truth," he added. Everyone listened silently as he spun the same lie that he had told Mr. Ollivander. Harry had contacted him, and Dumbledore had listened to him and believed. By the time Dumbledore finished, the audience was gaping at Harry. He thought they might be more impressed by the fact that he had used the Imperius Curse to save Cedric's life than anything else. "Blimey," Dean said. Seamus whistled. "Why aren't you telling the Ministry, though?" Ernie Macmillan asked. "Don't you think that everyone ought to know that you know who is back?" "The Ministry," Sirius said, "has entered a state of advanced paranoia." Harry could tell all the truth he wanted until he was blue in the face, but no one would listen. "But when we all tell them," Parvati began. "I am afraid that you will have to keep this conversation a secret," Dumbledore interrupted. "In fact, I'm afraid that I will have to take measures to ensure your silence." "What?" Dean said blankly. "You can't tell anyone that you saw me," Harry said. "You have to pretend like this conversation never happened." "But you're innocent," Justin Finch Fletchley said indignantly. "The whole school should know." "They wouldn't believe it," Ron said implacably. "And you just get hauled into Umbridge's office." When everyone exchanged dark looks, Harry suspected that Umbridge's use of a blood quill had not remained a secret. Luna and Neville both raised their right fists, upon which were the words, "I must not tell lies." "And this is just because she thinks we're lying about not knowing where Harry is," Neville said grimly. "If she knew that you were meeting here tonight, if she even suspected that you had met Harry and believed him, the consequences would be dire," Dumbledore said. "The Ministry is interfering here at Hogwarts, and I can assure you that the Aurors would strenuously question you, despite the fact that you are still children. But if I said anything, I would have to follow Harry into hiding," Dumbledore said. "I would not be allowed to remain here, offering what help I can to the students. And he would lose any power he had in the Wizengamot," Harry said. "We need him there more than I need him to defend me. The same goes for you." Hermione pulled out a blank parchment from her bag. "You will all need to sign this," she said firmly. "It will bind you to your promise that this does not leave the room. Neville and Luna won't sign. They've known for a while now that they have to keep this a secret, and if there are more people who begin to suspect something is funny, they'll be able to talk about it." "But," Ernie said uncertainly, "what will happen if we do say something?" "You won't be able to," Hermione said. "There's a jinx on this paper that will prevent you from speaking about it. It's a strong silencing charm. That's the only jinx, I promise." Daphne Greengrass was the first to sign. Harry suspected that she knew that she had the most to lose. Of all of them, she would be in the most physical danger if word got out that she was on his side. Colin and Dennis signed, beaming. Ernie and Hannah were the most reluctant, but they added their signatures anyway in the end. "I have a question for you," Harry said. "Do you want to learn a fight? Do you want to be able to defend yourselves against Voldemort?" "Of course," Ernie answered promptly. "But Umbridge is completely useless. I don't see how we're going to pass our OWLs with her teaching us." "That bitch is too afraid of what you'll do with it," Sirius said. "We know that the Ministry is trying to stop you lot from learning spells that can be used in a duel or a fight. They're dead afraid that Harry here will decide to enchant his old school friends. There's nothing they can do about the adults who have already learned these kinds of spells, but they want you lot handicapped as much as possible. And you won't have to fumble around with what Umbridge isn't teaching you, Harry added, grinning at the gleeful looks when Sirius called Umbridge a bitch. We'll teach you ourselves. We'll meet here as often as possible. Colin Creevey and his brother looked almost painfully eager. Harry felt a little pang of sadness at how willing they were to learn how to fight. He suspected that one day they would be put to use, and Harry wondered how long their innocence would survive in this war. Harry fervently hoped that it would be a long time before they saw Thestrals. Betrayal came swiftly and suddenly from a source unexpected. Neville. If we're going to learn to fight, we've got to have a proper name, don't we? And I've got the perfect one, since the Ministry's so afraid of it happening. Potter's Army. Harry gaped at him before he could stop it and vehemently refused to allow them to use his name. It should be Dumbledore's Army, for the love of Merlin. Everyone enthusiastically agreed. Harry glared at Ron and Ginny when they hooped and applauded. No, Neville, I don't think. It's perfect, Neville said stubbornly. It fits. Harry eventually had to stop arguing, though only because Ginny threatened to use her bat bogey hex on him. He still felt rather mutinous and annoyed, however, up until Hannah asked what their first lesson would be. Your first lesson, Harry began, already planning to teach them how to stun each other. But before he could finish, Moody released his charm. Constant vigilance, he shouted. Needless to say, it took several more minutes of explanations as to how their professor had come back from the dead before the others were ready to begin. Potter's Army, indeed.